GM everyone, and welcome to Identity Unleashed. I'm Titus. I'm the VP of Go-to-Market at Civic, where we empower developers with secure, seamless, privacy-preserving tools for user and identity management. This podcast dives into how digital identity is transforming industries at the intersection of Web 2 and Web 3. Now, before we begin, as always, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow us on your favorite platform. Your support makes a hell of a difference. Now, thanks for joining us today. We're talking about how privacy is making a comeback in 2025 and will be as important as ever, especially as more tools that protect user data are being released and identity keeps playing a key role in this puzzle. We have with us today Adrian Brink, the co-founder of intent-based architecture Anoma. Welcome to the show, Adrian. Tell us about Anoma and what you're working on right now.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Where do I start? So Anoma is fundamentally, it's an intent-centric distributed operating system. You can imagine it as it's like currently we live in this world of free windows almost, where like there are specific execution environments like the EVM or the SVM or the NearVM, but there's no unified sort of operating system abstraction that allows a developer and a user to just reason about the abstraction at the application level. And this is what Anoma fundamentally allows you to do via intents. It allows you to say, well, I'd like to trade A for B, and like I have some A on chain 1, and I'd like to get the B on chain 2. And then Anoma just does the sort of figures out how to make this actually happen. So you as a user, as a developer, you describe what you want, and then the system figures out how to actually get you the thing, so that you don't have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out how do I go from A to B, what are the primitives here. Plus, Anoma also is also provides some very strong privacy reasons on privacy guarantees on sort of an application level, so like developers can decide to leverage modern cryptography essentially, so that you can do things like I'd like to trade A for B, but I don't want to reveal who I am, but I'm willing to reveal what I want to trade. And you can even say crazier things like I'm only willing to interact with people that are on this whitelist or not on this blacklist. So it gives you the full flexibility across the stack to really deal with this heterogeneous environment that we are facing at the moment.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for that intro. This is super compelling, and I think it aligns a lot with what we're thinking about as well in terms of how people should interact in the blockchain space, have a more seamless experience, worry less about the underlying technology, and get more things done and focus more on their experience and what they actually want to do rather than how they do it and the rails behind the scenes. Now, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to the idea and the creation of Anoma?
So I joined as a third core dev in Cosmos back in the day in like January 2017, and have been involved in the blockchain space ever since. So I wrote my grad thesis at university about censorship-resistant e-voting. This was during the time of the Catalan independence referendum. And then I sort of like came across Sentiment, the research paper, and really deeply got into blockchains. Not because I hated the government or something like this. Like I think a lot of the early Bitcoiners came from this model. I was always like, for me, it was always how do you build more resilient systems? And this has sort of been the model that I've pursued over the years, which is I would like to build systems that are more resilient than the current versions of the internet-based systems that we have. Because I'm really worried living in Switzerland at the moment that like the Swiss financial system isn't going to survive a nation state level event if on the current system, right? So like this has always been my background, like how do we give users sovereignty? How would you give users choice that they can easily switch between many systems, and how do we make all of these things work together? So that like if you're in Argentina, you want global Ethereum for your security model. If my parents are in Germany, they want like local German consensus essentially. And it's like, how do we make this work in practice? Has always been sort of my background and like what I live for.
Very cool, very cool. So I want to talk a little bit more about privacy and like how it's making a comeback nowadays. Like as the world evolves, technology evolves, there's more and more challenges that come up. What do you think are the biggest challenges for users in terms of privacy today?
Yeah, I think people look at privacy kind of wrong. Like people, especially because this was so early on Bitcoiners, like they were like, oh, I want privacy to protect myself from the government. I mostly view privacy as like, it's the national defense tool. This is like, I think we shouldn't build financial systems that are fully transparent because sort of global adversaries can abuse them. And I think this is sort of the biggest challenge to make users and also like the world at large understand this. Like the reason why we want to be building these systems is because we want to have very good national defense, community defense systems, right? And the same for like why we care about distributed consensus is because we want to have resilient systems that are actually like capable to be put onto the public internet. I think a lot of people forget that when like our financial systems were developed, it was like in the 80s, no one really thought that the internet was going to look this way. I think this is one of the big challenges. I moved to Switzerland by choice, and I quite like it there. And like one of the interesting analogies that I recently realized is like, so American preppers prep for when the government comes after them, whereas the Swiss preppers prep for when the Russians come after Switzerland. And this is like, it's like the shift in mentality. I'm not a big, like I fundamentally believe that like the global consensus is going to be unstable long term in case of aggression somewhere due to fiber optic cables being a weak point. So like you want to build really good systems that are locally resilient and that can interoperate as much as possible, sort of as the network, as the underlying infrastructure allows you to. And I think sort of making people understand this with regards to privacy, it's really one of the big challenges. Coincidentally, like I think one of the quickest ways to get Ethereum shut down tomorrow is to move global finance onto Ethereum today. Because I think very quickly every nation state would realize like this is not a good idea. We should like definitely kill this right now. So I think it's a hard requirement that we get privacy on chain working for this to actually get large scale traction and adoption.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a couple of challenges that we see as well. Is that one is you can't really put any personal information on chain because you can't delete it, stays forever. You can't. I mean, even if it's encrypted, if that encryption breaks, still there's a risk. Then the other thing is this full transparency that you're talking about. Is like if I run my payroll, for example, on one of these fully transparent blockchains, then everyone can see how much money is in the company treasury, and like I can see everybody else's bank accounts essentially if those wallets become bank accounts. So it kind of gets to a point where people become uncomfortable, even if you're like fully pro transparency. That gets to a point where like I don't want to know what my neighbor's bank account looks like necessarily. If I pay my taxes or my local dues through the same wallet, like everybody else does it as well.
Yep.
Yeah, no, this is the big challenge today, and I think a lot of the blockchains need to solve this somehow without opening the door for bad actors.
I think this is going to be very fundamental. Otherwise, this is going, and like we saw this with the internet, right? Like the internet wasn't really gaining large scale usage until we figured out the privacy aspect of the internet, which is TLS. Like without TLS, the internet just like was a cool hobby thing that a bunch of enthusiasts used for like some questionable video streaming, but that was about it. Like as soon as you were like, oh, like how do my parents, like we should get these people onto the internet, it was like, well, we clearly need to enter encryption on the internet. Otherwise, the system isn't going to function very well. And I think like blockchains are currently in sort of the same position, where like the industry, we have to recognize that like this move from HTTP to HTTPS must happen as well. And like, the nice thing is the technology is getting way better nowadays. Like when we started, like when Zcash started in 2016, proofs were gigantic. They were complicated to generate. They're like computationally super expensive. And nowadays you can do this, like I can do this on my phone. It's not a problem anymore. And this is only going to get better over time.
Yeah, I believe so too. I remember the days when like you were running HTTP requests, and like if you're on an unsecured network with a bunch of other participants, it was super easy to grab the packets and just like sign in as them on Facebook or whatever, which is scary that we operate like that.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, let me move forward to kind of how the world looks like in an intent-centric distributed operating system. Like what does the user experience with the blockchain look like compared to today? What's different? What's the same? Where are we going?
Yeah, so Anoma is two things. Anoma is there's a global Anoma consensus, and then there's the Anoma protocol. And these two things are actually quite distinct, even though they're named the same thing. And this is very important for users and developers to understand. Like with Anoma, there isn't a global Anoma chain that you must send your intents to, for example. Anoma runs wherever you want it to run. So like Anoma is an operating system, really. It's a distributed operating system that Anoma can run on Near, can run on Ethereum, can run on Solana, you name it. And then there's a P2P stack that connects all these different instances. So then as a user, you just interact on the P2P level. You say things like, I would like to deploy my program today to Solana, or tomorrow I'd move to Neo, then the day after I move it to Ethereum, the day after I'm moving it to sort of Arbitrum. Or maybe you say things like, well, up until like $50, I'm very willing to be on Arbitrum, but beyond $50, I want to be on main chain. And this is really like the way to think about this, that like Anoma just runs wherever and whatever trust environment users want it to run. And this even extends to like my belief is fundamentally that like Switzerland is now going to like issue the CHF on a public blockchain. And my parents will never want to use public blockchain. Like they trust their local court system, right? So they want something that's like local, has a local trust anchor. And so I think like even when they want to have like a local instance that can still run Anoma. And so like when they then travel to Switzerland, they can roam between all these different security zones. And this is really like, they can roam between all these heterogeneous deployments. And Anoma is just the glue, the operating system API, so that we don't have to rewrite the applications for every new security zone. We can just like, and this is kind of like the way phones and passports work with nowadays, right? Like I bought this phone in New York, I think, or Toronto maybe, but it still works in Zurich. It still works in Shanghai. It still works in Lisbon. This is like kind of magic, but it's fundamentally because we agreed on the standard and we like, there's like a unified thing that all the phones understand and talk. This like right now we're really living in this world where, well, if I want to like communicate in Zurich versus New York, I should install a new application. This is sort of like the model we live right now in with blockchains. And with Anoma and the distributed operating system abstraction, it's really like we're moving to like this. The same application just works everywhere where Anoma is supported. And you can tap into existing liquidity on the existing systems. You can have solvers, so like you also get all the intent benefits. Like you just say, well, I'd like to do A for B, and someone else please figure out how to get me the B for A thing. And maybe this involves 50 different hops. Maybe this involves a trip to the rainforest to pick up a rare flower, whatever, right? Like, but it allows you as a user to outsource the hard compute to dedicated entities that are going to get paid for this. But like as a user, if you want to get a simple thing done, it's cheap. If you're going to want to get a complex thing done, it's expensive.
Gotcha. So I'm trying to find an analogy in the kind of ecosystems that I'm part of to see if there's anything even close to this, like being implemented even locally within the same chain. Like I'm thinking maybe the multi-hop exchange aggregators that kind of do a routing for you in the best liquidity pool. Is that a good analogy?
A little bit on the intent side. But the really big difference is that Anoma has fully generalized intent. So it's not like Anoma doesn't know what an asset is. The protocol doesn't know that like there's some ETH or there's some price points for it. It's just like, yeah, arbitrary state changes that you're willing to switch against each other. I think one of the closest things is actually OpenSea. So OpenSea, until they upgrade to Seaport, was using this protocol called the Y1DEX protocol, which my co-founder built, which is like this proto-intent system on Ethereum that allows you to swap arbitrary state transitions for each other. I think this is probably the closest one. Like the reason why it's very difficult to build this just for one ecosystem is because you need to get a lot of P2P networking actually working well. And once you have that, it's just like way easier to just like make this work in multiple places at the same time. Also, like I think we always forget in the blockchain space, it's like we're pushing the envelope here. This is so far along the edge that this is just coming this year. Like it's going to be super exciting, I think.
Yeah, no, it sounds super interesting. I think I'm still trying to wrap my head around where does this live in the grand scheme of things? Like if it's not a blockchain per se, if it's an operating system, like do you host it somewhere? Does it like live on one of the chains?
No, think of it like, like the Windows is an operating system. It's a protocol, right? And it happens to run on a server that you rent. It happens to run on AWS's server. And it also happens to run on your local laptop. But like you can take your application to all these 3 different places. And this is kind of the magic here. It's like you can take the applications with you to wherever Anoma runs. And like where Anoma runs is in the end like a chain choice, like which chains are expressive enough to support the operating system.
So are there chains that you guys are going to support from the get-go versus ones you're not going to support? Because I think like a lot of people we use a transaction-based blockchain model, whereas this intent-based architecture is slightly different from what we've seen so far.
Yeah, the intent-based architecture is very different. It's also just way easier for users to understand, right? Like when you sign a transaction, you sort of sign over you sign over a set of opcodes. You don't sign over a specific state transition. Whereas with an intent, you just sign over a specific state transition, and the specific compute that may happen to fulfill this, that's sort of determined later by the runtime or the solvers in the ecosystem. I think for us, we definitely going to support, global Anoma, also Ethereum, and then sort of from there on out, see where the road takes us, where there's a lot of demand.
Yeah, for sure. I think so. From that perspective, the part that I'm most interested about, obviously, is the identity and authentication. Like, how does that work in an intent-centric blockchain space versus the current ecosystem?
So with regards to identity, identity is actually one large unsolved challenge, I think. And the nice thing is it is very expensive to do things on chain because you need to get global consensus over some specific state transition, right? And for most identity-based systems, you want to make this very cheap. So ideally, you want to allow users to verify each other directly in a peer-to-peer manner. Then only once if you've reached a certain number of verified identities, then you want to roll this up into some global state. And this is exactly what intents allow you to do. So like that if you want to build the identity-based system, you don't have, now you still have to think like, oh, how do I build like this backbone where users can directly talk to each other and exchange some data? And with Anoma, this all just comes for free, so that you focus on your application, as in like you want to build some specific form of identity verification, and this could be a centralized one, or this could be a decentralized one, like where you have these like key exchange parties. But Anoma just provides you this infrastructure so that you just focus on like, I want to build identity. I don't want to have to worry about how do I run a background service to aggregate all these things. This is all just done in the operating system. Like you can describe this in the operating system API, and then solvers, P2P gossip nodes get involved as required.
So, for example, if I want to prove that I am a unique person in this intent-centric ecosystem, how would that look like? What would that entail?
It depends, right? Like it depends. Like this becomes a business choice, and like what is a unique user and what is a unique person. So you need to have some oracle, for example, that you can ask like, here's a signature for my passport. Like, can you sign this as this being authentic? And this is really like doing this on chain is really stupid because like you then have to post all the intermediary steps on chain. Whereas in the case with the intent-centric systems like Anoma, you just say, you create an intent, for example, I'm a real human being and here's sort of like the proof for this. And then you have a bunch of then you can send this intent around, and then maybe like 5 of your family members see this intent and then they sign over this. So now you have sort of an aggregated intent that says like your claim, I'm a unique person, and like the 5 people in your village that say, yes, we know the guy. It's fine. He's clearly unique. And then this gets combined, and then those 5 intents together actually form a valid transaction for example, for like a KYC purposes. This is also, it's a way more scalable model this way, because we never have to route things via central hubs. And like decentralized blockchains are still central hubs, but you do much more on the P2P level to like figure out like, oh, I have some intent, I'd like to achieve something. Then you figure out on a P2P fashion how you coordinate to achieve that thing. And then only once you've achieved it, do you sort of present the end results to the rest of the world and get global consensus in the end result. So that's sort of like how I could imagine the system to look like in practice.
So essentially the intent that I've validated in this case would live in my own operating system.
Yes, like
afterwards.
So also,
yeah.
Or you could, this is also a nice thing, like you can also outsource like the storage to some solver, right? Like, so solvers are just general, like they provide some services. This could be compute, bandwidth, storage. And so it may also mean like maybe you don't want to store all your data locally, but you like are willing to outsource this to some guy that runs a bunch of nodes in a data center, so that provides very cheap storage. Of course, I mean, like you always have to consider trust assumptions and so on, like what's the liveness assumptions, but like essentially it allows you to structure your digital life incredibly flexibly, rather and like seamlessly, because everything sort of lives behind the same high level abstraction, so you don't have to like go use 5-6 different systems in order to like sort of achieve what you want.
Yeah, so in this case, I think the way I'm interpreting it is essentially your identity traits and your authentication are all intents in this case, and it's up to each builder to define what they require for those intents to be proven, what proof is sufficient.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. This reminds me in a way. Are you familiar with the DID standards, the decentralized identity standards?
Yeah. Not as much.
No, because they kind of have a similar principle with solvers, with like independently verifiable claims. It's
It's a pretty common problem, right? Like, there is no global notion of identity. Like if you want to have sort of proof that I'm a real human being, like passports are kind of like an okay thing in most places, but realistically, like the best people to attest to my identity is like my grandma's friends because they've seen me grow up in my local village, right? And so I like especially identity is a very specific local notion. So you need to have these very flexible standards. So it makes sense that the ID is actually like similarly phrased in terms of like having many possible providers.
Yeah, and I think we've seen multiple ways to prove identity. There's governments working on digital identity. There's tools that are measuring biometrics of multiple sources, from your fingerprints to your irises to your face scans and depth maps and so on. We do need to find ways to fight the bad actors that are constantly trying to break systems, because that's the fight in crypto right now.
Yeah. This has been the fight over the internet as well. This has always been the fight, I think. Like, and fundamentally, to do new things, like things will always get abused, and like there's no perfect security in the world. And, like even the current policies, like clearly don't achieve this, right? And so I think we've got to be honest. Like we have got to keep pushing the envelope to make our systems more resilient and easier to use. And it's like figure out over time, like how do you make sure that these systems work securely? I mean, if you look at the early internet was wild. And like over time, like the communities just like figured out like these are the acceptable practices.
Yeah, I remember the different communication tools that we used with very minimal security and very minimal assurance that this is actually the person that they're claiming to be behind the
I love
name.
the early internet. The early internet was so fun.
It was fun, but it was also kind of a dangerous place if you look back.
Yeah.
from in a lot of ways. I do want to comment on something that you mentioned a couple of times: the passport being the measure of like uniqueness verification. I think it's a great tool, but I think what I want kind of builders to take away from this is we need to make sure that we choose inclusive ways of verification, especially for us. Like we did 1 million passes like to date. People don't have these tools at their availability usually. Like if you think of the world as like 7-8 billion people, very small fraction of that has passports, and then the rest have various other documents and or methods to authenticate and prove their identity. So something to keep in mind.
I think like long term, I mean, like one of the best ways to do some practice, as far as I'm concerned, is like you want to have like, because identity and trust is fundamentally local. It's like people that you and local here are like culturally close. Let's say culturally close, because it could be like physically local or culturally local, close to each other. As in like you've been playing on the same World of Warcraft drawing for the last 20 years, right? Like, and you want to have an identity system that like where you can sign over essentially like I can attest to you being a real human and so on. And then you can start building up these graphs of like, there's like a pretty strong reason to believe that this is a real person with these characteristics. And like, I think we should only see passports as like an easily forgeable thing that like can like be part of it, but it shouldn't certainly be like the only thing.
Yeah, I feel like payments had this problem to begin with, right? And that's how credit cards evolved into these complex cryptographic systems that still get stolen and forged, unfortunately, to date.
Yeah.
And I think identity needs to go in that direction as well, as more and more of our accounts are tied to our identity. And right now, they're verified in very old school ways, unfortunately, still.
I mean, it's going to be interesting, right? Like when I think about the neobanks, I'm like, or like even the centralized exchanges in crypto, like I don't see them surviving the next like 5 to 10 years, because generative AI is just going to get so good and so cheap that if we don't figure out another way to authenticate people, like give them identity, it's just so easy to like even like fool like tilt your password in front of the camera to like regain access to your account. And like I think the reason why crypto is actually like almost going to win for certain is because we just need to give people unforgeable credentials essentially. Because generative AI is just going to like at some point there's going to be a cracking hack where like they reset 100,000 accounts and just drain them all at once. Because like I mean, it's like, right now this may seem like magic, but like give it 2 years and generative AI on video is just going to be so good that anyone can just like fake this, like flip your password in front of your face a little bit to like authenticate themselves against Kraken again. And I think honestly, decentralized identity is sort of going to be inevitable because current systems are just not designed for the world we're moving to.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that is definitely one thing that needs to happen sooner rather than later. And then the other thing is combining multiple sources of proofs, like beyond just flipping the passport and like other interesting ways to prove humanness, combining it with some sort of key material connected to some sort of cryptographic device that you have in your possession so that it's impossible to break it, like 2-factor, 3-factor, even 4-factor for high risk operations. I think sometimes we take stuff too lightly, and you have like a bank account that has, I don't know, a phone based text message. I'm like, no, why is that there? And there's no other way to secure your account. Like, that's my 2-factor. That's the only thing that we support. Even though we have authenticators, we have like all these tools out there that we could be using.
The next thing is like intents very cleanly abstract this way. That like intents are just like this idea of, right, like it's a partial state transition. It's like I would like to get something done and I need to interact with someone. Like one of the simplest intent-based systems is actually Gnosis Safe. It's like when you think of what a multisig is, well, it's a number of people that want to come together to form a multisig. So like a partial, like 1 out of 3 multisig signature, well, that's not acceptable on a blockchain. That's like not that, because that's not a valid transaction. And so what sort of currently the way to sidestep this is to run a centralized server that collects all these signatures and the last guy pulls it. But with intents, you can just have like this native implementation that abstracts this multisig away, and that abstracts like, oh, I have an intent. This is the first 1 out of 3, and then you sign the second 1 out of 3, and then the third person signs the third 1 out of 3. And then sort of a solver sees like, oh, now all the signatures are here. Let me combine them and settle them as a transaction on chain. But like this is why like native intent support is going to be so fundamentally crucial to build a lot of these things in practice. Because transactions are terrible abstraction. Well, the transactions are good abstraction if you like go to a store and buy milk with Bitcoin, but that's where it kind of stops.
Yeah, I agree, and I've heard this from builders, like treasury management. If somebody leaves, like what happens with the Gnosis Safe? Like how do you solve these problems in a predictable way? Like in a Web2 scenario, you have your like, I don't know, Google org or Microsoft org or whatever email provider you use. That's your kind of main shut-off switch. But in crypto, like everybody has key material, like you can't take that away from them. So definitely a big challenge where identity can play a part. Cool. So I feel like we've touched upon some of the kind of intent-centric technologies for Web3 over the next 5 years. But is there anything else you want to add for the next 5 years that people should think about and you want people to think about?
I think at an infrastructure level, it's intense. It's heterogeneous trust. It's like we'll be on many different systems. Like we'll probably see hundreds of thousands of blockchains. Like my phone is probably going to be a blockchain in itself. It's going to be one blockchain, right? I think AI is going to play a big role in this actually. And like intents are going to fundamentally drive, like is what allows AI agents to interact with the rest of the ecosystem. I think that's something we didn't touch on as much, but like really, like if you want to make this AI angle work, you need intents as an underlying infrastructure. Yeah, I think that's pretty much, and like ZK proofs are going to be cool. Everything's going to be ZK proof, especially
everything. Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think, I mean, there's going to be a world where an AI agent spins up a rollup as a service, and then we have to like figure out how to transact on one rollup versus another and take the proofs from one place to another and interconnect all those rails. Because I feel like, especially in the EVM world, the fragmentation is super visible now. I think Solana is going in sort of a similar direction with the SVMs that are launching now. So a lot of the blockchains are just like layering on top L2s, L3s, L4s, who knows, L10s we'll see in a few years. Awesome. Well, I know we're close to wrapping this up. Is there kind of any last words you want to leave people with? What's next for you guys? What's next for Anoma? Any announcements, interesting initiatives that are in the works?
Yeah, local sovereignty is cool. Please care about local sovereignty and like run your own infrastructure. If you're the only person in your community that knows how to install the full node, you're in charge. Good luck. To make sure that your local community is good. I think from the Anoma side, I mean, so private devness have just launched a couple of weeks ago now. So the first builder teams are out there. There will be some big announcements coming down the pipeline with regards to how to get involved, being an early builder on Anoma. And then, yeah, we're gearing up. Things are happening this year. Things are going live. It'll be the first generalized intent protocol that you can use across the ecosystem. So yeah, exciting things are coming.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This is an awesome chat. And yeah, to our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow us on your favorite platform. It really helps us bring you more great content. And don't forget to check out civic.com to learn more about what we do. Over and out.
Thank you very much.